Yo, what up everybody, it's Tuna. In today's video, I'm going to be taking you over some of the things that I've learned about the mercenaries mechanic and how to min-max your mercenaries specifically for Volcanic Fissure of Snaking, the skill that I have leak started. If you want to know more about Volcanic Fissure of Snaking, I did make a full build guide as well as a written guide for max roll. Check it out there if you're still looking for a build or potentially looking for a reroll. Been performing exceptionally well. It's progressed into red tiers, done all the pinnacle bosses and that sort of stuff on a 5 link, finished my void stones, and it's been pretty great so far. And of course, the written guide does help with giving you guys a bit of context and all that kind of stuff. But regardless, let's talk about the mercenaries. The mercenary that you absolutely want is going to be called Eruptor. The reason for that is because he spawns with a combination of skills that no other mercenary spawns with. And this combination of skills includes Flame Link. As you can see here on screen, this is the list of skills that Eruptors can spawn with. Now, when you find an Eruptor in your maps, it doesn't instantaneously mean that he's going to be having Flame Link. However, you're going to have a combination of all of these different sort of like skill gems, like Infernal Cry, which is pretty good as well, Leap Slam, Trigger Slam, Volcanic Fissure of Snaking, Consecrated Path, so on and so forth. The most notable ones here are, of course, his Aura, Determination, Purity of Fire, as well as, of course, Flame Link, which is the main reason why we want this guy. The reason why Infernal Cry can be good, I'll talk about a little bit later, but you don't necessarily need any of these things aside for Flame Link. Flame Link is the main one that you really want on him. And ideally, if you can get one with Flame Link and Determination, that's great, because he's going to be providing you with an extra ton of armor, and of course Flame Link is going to be providing you with a ton of damage. Now, as you guys know, Determination basically provides you with a flat amount of armor as well as a percent increase, or percent more multiplier rather, and this greatly boosts your defenses on Volcanic Fissure. We are not using any auras currently in our build. All of our mana is spent on auto exertion as well as heralds, because that provides us with the most amount of damage. And it feels like for the most part there are a lot of aura mods which affect the strength of your aura, the potency and that kind of stuff on maps. So overall, this is the most consistent setup for us. However, since we are not using an aura, we can make use of a new cool thing called the Rune Graft of Treachery. And the Rune Graft of Treachery is actually going to be giving us 15% increased reservation efficiency for skills. However, our auras will also affect allies. This means that generally we can't be using damage auras, especially because damage auras are going to be giving the enemies more damage and that sort of stuff. We can use Determination though, because we are primarily, fully elemental build. The armor on enemies was not going to do anything. But of course, the mercenaries are not are not affected by this rune graft, meaning regardless of what auras they have, they're not going to be giving positive bonuses to the monsters, right? Because this rune graft only specifically applies to you. Regardless, you're going to be getting an Eruptor with that mod combination, and you can also go for an Infamous Eruptor. The difference between the two, I'm not exactly sure what the difference between Infamous and non-Infamous is, outside of potentially getting better items, as well as maybe potentially a better combination of skills. Let's talk about Flame Link. So Flame Link is the reason why we are looking for the Eruptor in the first place. And as I start reading here, you guys will probably realize why it's so broken. Flame Link lasts 8 to 9.9 seconds. The Eruptor is going to be trying to link onto you as much as possible. Like, he has pretty decent AI, and since Flame Link doesn't break when he's far away, he's going to be teleporting on you before that breaks. So you're basically going to be having very high uptime on this. And what does this give? It gives 169 to 254 added fire damage. Now, for reference, if we're going to be looking at Anger is giving us a total top end of 109 to 155 additional flat fire damage. So this basically doubles the amount that Anger gives, which by the way is a 50% aura, of course. Yeah, double the amount that Anger gives, which is already a ton of damage. And then on top of that, link targets gain added fire damage equal to 5% of your maximum life. 5% of your maximum life. This includes, of course, the life of your mercenary here. And if you go on the mercenary inventory, if you click on stats, you can see that his life is right here. So he has 5,751 life. That's without having many life affixes on him, meaning you can actually go for a crazy amount of damage if you just stack life on your mercenary. So you can go pretty min-maxed because of this line. 5% of your max life, meaning if you have something like, if you get your mercenary to, which I feel like is fairly achievable, if you get him to about 8,000 life and you multiply it by 1.05, gonna be 400 extra, so that's an extra 400 flat damage that you are getting from this. 400 flat, so that's 400 on top of the already 169, 254. If we were to take 169 plus 254 and we divide that by 2, it's gonna be 209 flat plus 400, total of 696 additional fire damage. This is basically the equivalent of using a second weapon, pretty much. Like, obviously our weapon is going to be around like 900 physical damage or something like that, but you know, 696 additional physical damage. This is going to be just like on its own. You get Flame Link, pretty much almost doubling your damage, so well making up for the 50% that you are getting from him. So yeah, as you can see, like I'm really excited about this because it's just completely broken, and yeah. So all of the next things that I'm going to be talking about, like the gear decisions and that sort of stuff, it's nowhere near as important as obviously finding an eruptor with Flame Link. However, I will talk about some of the itemization decisions that you can make on your mercenary right now, so that you guys have an idea of what other items you can put on him to make him like stronger and that kind of stuff. Now, just to mention, just so you guys do know, in my max roll guide that I will link in the description as well, there is a tab here after the FAQ talking about the mercenaries of Trarthus, and it's going to be recommending things like the runecraft, as well as showing all of the gear linked here. So if you want to have that all in one place, including the progression and all that kind of stuff, you can just come check it out there. And this will give you an idea of, or rather a place where you can reference to just see what sort of items. And I will potentially, as I have more findings and things like that are not worthy of making another video, I will just link them in here, or potentially also in my spreadsheet. So yeah, keep that in mind if you ever need. And yeah, let's talk about some of the itemization decisions. If I was to open my inventory here, you can see my eruptor. And by the way, I'm making this video, but I still have not yet found an eruptor with Flame Link, so I'm extremely sad. But just explaining some of the theory there. So for my helmet, I have just a random helmet here with a little bit of life and some life regeneration. Life regen helps him a little bit, but it's not all that important, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video why. Yeah, here the most important modifier, as you can see, is your war cries cover enemies in ash for 5 seconds. This is a modifier from an item that you can basically just like, you can plonk it on him. You can buy this on trade, or you can find it from other strength-based mercenaries, like eruptors and stuff like that, actually. So yeah, what this does is he does have an infernal cry, and he's always going to have a war cry as far as I know. All eruptors have war cries, and when he war cries, he's going to cover enemies in ash. You can see here from the wiki, cover in ash is a debuff that causes the effective target to have less movement speed and increase fire damage taken. So he has a total of 20% less movement speed and 20% increased damage taken. Now the increased damage taken is pretty good because we do not have shock, so we are not getting into like diminishing returns and stuff like that, but we do use punishment. However, 20% increased fire damage taken is already pretty insane. It's going to give you about like anywhere between like 15% damage. I would say like 10 to 15% damage is about what you're getting here when you are below 50% HP. So when you take into account punishment and that sort of stuff, but it's already, that in itself is a crazy amount of damage. And when you take it in combination with all the other items, we're getting even more. So the next item I want to talk about is Perkle's Toe. This one's a classic. You can actually anoint this too, eventually probably anointing life on him so he gets a bit more flat life. But yeah, Perkle's Toe is going to be giving lucky damage. Lucky damage on fire builds is not that good. Our ranges are pretty small. However, this actually does end up being still around 6% damage buff with mid-tier gear kind of stuff. So 6% damage on an amulet slot that we can just put on him is pretty good. And then the gloves, they look like trash, but like the main thing about this is that they have cursed element enemies with elemental weakness on hit, which elemental weakness is going to be reducing their elemental resistance by an X amount. Keep in mind, however, that on the glove implicit, it is only a level 1 elemental weakness, meaning it's going to be lowering their resistances by only 15%, instead of course, 30 is what it can roll up to at higher gem levels. You cannot use Curse Ring, you know, the one with the socket. Let me remember the name real quick. It finally came to be. It's the Mark of Submission ring. You cannot use this because you can put a curse inside of this ring, of course, level 20 curse. However, when you do put it on the mercenary itself, the curse does not appear on his stat sheet, and it basically, the gem just disappears in the art. So that doesn't work. Make sure that you get flammability on hit on your gloves. And you want to pair that with a Dodri's Damning. This is mandatory because the way that curse limit works is that it's a global modifier across all players within an instance, so that you could sort of like, this is to sort of like make sure that there isn't abuse where like every player can apply a curse and then a monster just has like 16 curses on them or whatever. So yeah, basically it's a global modifier, meaning I'm cursing with punishment, and he's going to be cursing with elemental weakness. So getting +1 is mandatory to have those two curses applied, so that our elemental weakness does not replace our what's it called? Our punishment. What am I saying? I'm just having a mental block here for a sec. But yeah, get +1 there, and you're going to be cursing on hit. Now, the next item I want to talk about is the Legacy of Fury. This is a Maven drop, and you don't care about any of the stats on this whatsoever, aside from the fact that it says nearby enemies are scorched. So when your Eruptor goes and stands next to an enemy, he's going to be applying Scorch. What does Scorch do? It's basically just like elemental weakness. Now, if I look it up here, it's going to be like -13%, I think, or something like that, based off of the boots themselves. I think it's about 13%, but it scales with ailment effect. And yeah, it's going to be like negative resistance for the monster itself, so that's an additional -13 resist on the mobs themselves. So we're getting like -15 here, -13, covered him in ash, 20% increased damage taken, Urkel's Toe for 6% more damage, and finally, Chaos Binding, going to be making nearby enemies convert 25% of their damage, physical damage, to fire. And since we are using maximum elemental resistance flasks, you know, like Ruby Flask and that kind of stuff, we're much more equipped to mitigate elemental damage compared to physical damage, even though we have a ton of armor, right? Like, it's still a lot of mitigation, and especially like armor becomes much more effective the smaller a hit is. So in a case where you have a large fizz hit, armor is doing less and less. And what this does is it takes 25% of that fizz hit and it splits it to fire, meaning that your armor just becomes basically exponentially more effective as the hits get smaller. So yeah, this allows you to make that hit a little bit smaller in order for you to more effectively mitigate the physical damage that you take. So that is pretty much it for the mercenaries for Volcanic Fissure of Snaking. There's still a lot of min-maxing to do, of course, with the life stacking, and hopefully I can get one with Flame Link. But that's all the information that I have so far on this topic, and I hope you guys get a Flame Link guy as soon as possible. I am fiending for one, and yeah, otherwise I am streaming every day on YouTube and Twitch if you want to come say hello or ask any questions regarding the build or anything PoE related in general. I have way too many hours in this game, and I would be, happy to help. So hope you guys have had a fantastic league start. I appreciate you all, and yep, see you soon.